Chapter 6. Hugh Pine had some peace and quiet for a while, for the committee ran into a bit of trouble. It turned out that every porcupine liked a different part of the woods, and there were a lot of meetings and a lot of stumping about. They snorted and snarled, and it even came to fights. Fist fights, of course, for porcupines use their tails only when nothing else works, and when they are cornered and in danger of losing their lives. The spines on their tails are loose and come off when they hit something. They are like little arrows, full of sharp, nasty barbs, which can travel right through somebody's body and cause all sorts of damage. So, when porcupines get cross with each other, they sit on their dangerous tails, using them like the legs of a chair, and hit each other with their fists. That doesn't hurt so much, and it still looks impressive. And while everybody was snorting and shouting and boxing, the committee ran around and broke up the fights and tried to get them all to sit in a circle and speak one at a time. But every time they almost had the circle arranged, some of the porcupines would wander away and go and eat something. Finally, when the committee threatened to give up, the porcupines remembered that the matter was serious, and finally, they all agreed. They sent the fastest porcupine, who was quite slow really, but much faster than the others, to climb a big tree on a high hill. He shouted down to them, describing what he saw, and they made a sort of map by scratching lines in the sand. The part inside the lines was the woods where they wanted to live. The committee went to look for Hugh Pine again, and they told him what they had done. He didn't quite understand what they meant, but he came back with the committee and studied the scratch lines and listened to their explanations of what the lines meant. "Well?" the committee asked. "You're not so dumb as you say you are," Hugh Pine said. "If you can do this, why can't you learn to walk upright and wear red hats and stick to the left side of the road?" "We can't," said the committee. Hugh Pine sat and thought. The committee didn't want to disturb him. He didn't look too happy, but because he never looked too happy, the committee had no idea what he was thinking. They thought he was just sitting, but he wasn't. The fact is that Hugh Pine really felt sad. Here was the committee, all eager and pleased about their map. But soon there would be fences where they had scratched their lines, and all the porcupines would be behind the fences, locked in. Hugh Pine was a porcupine too, and he had always been free to wander as he pleased. But then he thought about the Spike twins and his brother Graystreak and all the others that weren't around anymore. No, there was nothing else to do. There would be a fence. He sighed and put on his floppy hat and set out bravely on the long road to Rotworth. "Hello," Mr. McTosh said when Hugh Pine walked through the post office door. "Did you find out in which part of the woods your friends want to live?" "I can scratch it for you," Hugh Pine said. Mr. McTosh went out with him to the yard behind the post office and watched as Hugh Pine scratched around in a patch of clean sand, explaining that this scratch was a tree and that scratch was a hill, and all the little scratches were Pobby's Pond, and the line over there was the Burbling Brook, and the other little scratches were the bay. "Yes," Mr. McTosh said. "I see. I know the brook, that's where we catch suckers in the spring. And there's the beach where we dig for clams, and that big part over there is the pine forest where we hunt deer in the autumn." "Exactly," Hugh Pine said. He was very glad that Mr. McTosh could understand. "Hugh Pine," Mr. McTosh said solemnly, "you are a smart animal, and I am pleased you came to see me. But this map shows a couple 100 square miles. Your woods are enormous. Enormous." "Aren't they?" Hugh said. He was still very glad. Mr. McTosh seemed to be understanding him fine. He felt so glad that he got up and began to caper about. Usually porcupines only caper about later in the year, in midsummer, when they feel the need for company and are ready to start their families. But Hugh Pine was an exceptional porcupine, and he liked to break rules. Mr. McTosh watched and smiled. Hugh Pine's long hairs that hid his quills fluttered and wagged and shook, and the shorter, stiff hairs of his whiskers bristled and curled, and the hairs of his thin mustache stood up, and his little dark round ears moved every time he stamped his feet. Mr. McTosh laughed, and Hugh Pine stopped his dance. His teeth showed in a large, silly grin. "Well," he said, "now maybe you can have the fence built." "No," Mr. McTosh said. "No?" Hugh Pine asked. "No," Mr. McTosh repeated. "That fence would be 100 miles long. I couldn't ask the people to build such a long fence. They wouldn't do it." Hugh Pine's merriment was gone. His front paws hung down. He closed his eyes. He felt terrible. He would have to go far, far, far away, so far that none of the porcupines could find him again. He wasn't so smart after all. He sighed sadly. Hugh Pine, with the red floppy hat, the great marvel who could walk upright, had made a promise. And nothing would happen. Everything would go on as before. The porcupines would be crossing the roads, and the cars would come, and wham! It would be better if he went away and got lost somewhere in a dark forest where he would be the only porcupine around, so that nobody could remind him that he had broken his promise. He might as well go right now and find that gloomy place where the trees would be dead, covered with lichen, an old man's beard growing on their rotten, barkless wood. He moaned and began to stiffen his muscles so he could get up, but Mr. McTosh wasn't done yet. He sat down opposite Hugh Pine and reached out and patted the top of his bushy head, making sure he didn't brush the hairs the wrong way, for he didn't want to expose the quills underneath and get them into his hand. "Never mind, Hugh," he said. "I would have a fence built, and I will have a fence built. A short fence, a few 100 yards, maybe half a mile. Maybe, if all goes well, a mile, but no more. And look here at this map. Here, you see, over there goes the road. We'll build the fence along this stretch here, and your buddies can have the land on the other side, as far as the bay here and the pond there. That'll give them some space to run around in, and they'll be safe." Hugh Pine nodded. I see, he said slowly. "Good," said Mr. McTosh happily. "Maybe it doesn't look like much land, but porcupines aren't all that big, and there are plenty of trees in there, and a lot of bushes, and a nice patch of raspberries, and a lot of dead wood on the ground that'll be covered with juicy mushrooms. They'll have everything they want, I am sure." "Good," Hugh Pine said. "And we'll start tomorrow," Mr. McTosh said. "We'll bring saws and axes, and we'll cut up some cedars and make posts. It'll be a lovely fence. Just tell your friends to get in there and not to move about too much for a few days. And then, when we go away, the land will be all theirs." "They won't be able to climb the fence, will they?" Hugh Pine asked, for he knew what would happen if the fence wasn't high. The porcupines would forget all about what it was for and would climb over it into the road. "No," Mr. McTosh said. "It'll be high, twice as high as I am." "That's very high," Hugh Pine agreed. "And it'll be made of metal wire, chicken wire, we call it. They can climb some of it, maybe, but they'll never get to the top. And just to make sure, I'll put some special wire on the top, barbed wire. They won't want to touch that because it'll hurt their paws." Hugh Pine looked at his own paws and turned them over. He wanted to say something, but he blew through his whiskers instead. His quills squeaked as he shivered. Mr. McTosh was waiting. "Good," Hugh Pine said. "Thank you very much, Mr. McTosh." He had some trouble with the "tosh," but he got it out properly in the end. Mr. McTosh opened the door of the yard and waved goodbye as Hugh Pine made his way down the road. He stopped a few times to wave back, but not too often, for it wasn't so easy to stand upright, hold onto his hat, and wave all at the same time. And he didn't want to fall on his face, especially not after such a successful meeting. End of chapter 6.